Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. After a historically brutal and divisive election, we got a clear winner in this weekend. But unsurprisingly, President Trump has refused to accept reality. But what is shocking is that folks who should know better have decided to put Trump's ego before the nation. Mitch McConnell, he's the Senate Majority Leader.
It's not unusual. It should not be alarming. At some point here, we'll find out finally who was certified in each of these states, and the Electoral College will determine the winner, and that person will be sworn in on January 20th.
Those are new rules he's never used just for this year. Plus, the top diplomat in the country, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, our forward face to the world, he's also supporting his boss.
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. All right, we're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly.
Again, never like we're seeing now. President-elect was asked a couple weeks ago about Trump refusing to concede, and this was his response.
I just think it's an embarrassment, quite frankly. The only thing that, how can I say this tactfully? I think it will not help the president's legacy.
Embarrassing is the perfect world, and it is not just embarrassing, it's flat out dangerous what's going on. It is in the national interest, particularly in a worsening pandemic, particularly when you have a disengaged president, that we have a seamless transition of power. This is what's good for America. Forget about one party or the other. But instead, despite an electoral margin identical to Trump's electoral count victory in 2016 that Trump then called a landslide, Trump now whines like a chastened infant that he was quote-unquote cheated because of massive fraud. Now, like everything else about our president, this is a mountain of lies masked as a grievance to cover for insecurities of a soon-to-be certified loser. This is all predictable, but it is the enabling of this attack on democracy that I don't know why, but I've been shocked by. Now, privately, I can't tell you how many Republicans, electeds, have told me they have been counting the days, the hours, to Trump getting his election comeuppance. Now, they know the disgrace that he has brought to the office. They shudder about the disinterest when it comes to knowing policy, his coddling of our enemies, the daily divisiveness, and his absence of even just a scintilla of dignity. Now, these same Republicans got exactly what they wanted last Tuesday. It couldn't have gone better for them. They got a removal of a national embarrassment that had hijacked their party, while still, in all likelihood, keeping the Senate in GOP control and even making some inroads in the House. But when reality set in with Trump that he was a loser, the inevitable tantrum began. He took his ball and he went home. He goofed off on the golf course. He began firing people, starting with the defense secretary, and there will be more. And then he ginned up his base with baseless lies of a stolen election, simultaneously demanding votes to be counted in some states he was trailing, and then unbelievably ordering the count to be ceased where he was leading. Now, to a rational person, this was pathetic. It reeked of desperation. But that's to a rational person. To Mitch McConnell, however, this was yet another moment to prove his spine is made of spaghetti. Even though a handful of his Republican colleagues in the Senate acknowledged reality and even congratulated President-elect Biden, on the same day that Mitch McConnell welcomed newly elected GOP senators, he then said in the next breath, we had to wait for the election to be certified and that Trump should pursue his Don Quixote lawsuits. Unbelievable. 4 years ago, despite Hillary Clinton winning by more than 4 million votes in the popular vote and losing by even smaller margins than Trump did last Tuesday with the same electoral margin, she was called on to concede by our buddy Mitch. Now, Mitch's cowardice is only trumped by his hypocrisy. Secretary Pompeo, well, this guy took it one step further today. I showed you what he said. He talked of a second Trump term that not even Donnie Jr. believes is in the offing. His disgraceful enabling of Trump, it has led to countless resignations at the State Department. He's allowed lifetime civil servants to be targeted and threatened for the crime of telling the truth, the crime of looking out for America's national interests and security. If he was in Oz, his wish would be for some courage. Our Attorney General? Well, Mr. Barr would need a battery of organs starting with a heart. If anyone of this clown car should understand what the rule of law should stand for, it is him. If anyone who has served with giants in our Justice Department for as long as he has shouldn't need to be told why department guidelines are and why they are important, it is him. If after over 2 years of perverting the law, abusing his office, being impeached, and telegraphing he'd attempt to steal a presidency if he didn't win it fair and square, if Barr still didn't know he was coddling a man who was the embodiment of everything he swore to defend against, then he needs to ask the wizard for a brain as well. Now, this hot mess of enablers might privately be saying, hey, you know what, we're just humoring Trump. We're simply delaying the inevitable. Now, if those cowards really believe that, I suggest they watch Fox News and take a listen to Rush.
Let's be very direct. Many are trying to steal this election from President Trump. There is no doubt about it. The only doubt is the extent of it.
You can't just cut away from coverage you don't like. You can't simply tell people to accept an outcome, because force doesn't work in a democracy. That's dictatorship. We need to find out exactly what happened in this election.
There's simply no way Joe Biden was legitimately elected president. It just can't believe it. I do not believe it.
It's unbelievable. But the mountain of lies that they're dealing with in this alternate universe they're populating seems at least to have some listeners. I'm not just talking with the folks with the red hats. The folks in Georgia apparently are tuning in. The two Republican Georgians, okay, these two senators who are now scheduled for a runoff in January after getting an election scare, they're now calling for their own state secretary to resign because he hasn't said there was fraud in last week's election. I should mention, the Secretary of State in Georgia is a Republican, and thankfully, he's dismissing their nonsense for what it is, lunacy. Okay. I know we are living in unique times. This election was brutal. But if we believe that reason would suddenly return after Trump left, we have not been paying attention. There is an unholy circle going on. A president who looks out only for himself, an elected hierarchy of people that are so afraid of him they won't cross him and will enable whatever those instincts are, and then finally a media loop that makes sure that the consumers hear only the non-factual, dangerous rhetoric that I'm afraid will continue to divide this nation. We are at an inflection point here. Yes, I believe without any doubt that Joe Biden will be our next president. But what happens in the next 71 days, what this president is permitted to do in the next 71 days, I think will say quite a bit not only about the Republican Party, our institutions, and that media loop, because I don't know how we put it all back together if we're not on the same page. All right, I want to bring in my first guest tonight, Washington Post op-ed columnist Dana Milbank. Dana, I just went through my whole rant about how messed up this is and the hypocrisy so rank, but this isn't just that it's wrong. This carries consequences, and folks may have seen in the Post, your piece yesterday, that we're literally jeopardizing national security here. And if people remember, after 9/11, one of the things that we learned is, and we had a decent reason with the recount in Florida, but that interregnum, we didn't use that time to get that transition fast-tracked. A lot of people say played a role here in that gap of intelligence. This does carry consequences, this stupid parlor game going on right now.
It sure does, Richard. And sort of the argument you'll hear when Republicans aren't having their name used is saying, well, let's just let him have his temper tantrum. It's not going to change the results of the election. No harm done. I understand why they're saying that, but the fact is there is harm being done in a very real way. Look, everything involved in the functioning of government is going to be slowed down by definition by this. If you can't get the new administration's landing teams in there, as they're called, to sort things out. Now, that's true whether it's administering the vaccine, which we now have good news about, and even more importantly, whether it's a national security crisis. And as you mentioned, this was specifically mentioned by the 9/11 Commission. I talked to a top NSC official from George W. Bush's administration, and he said, this is threatening our national security every day that this is delayed.
Strip away the morality of this. I'm still at a loss. I understand why Pompeo, and I showed that stupid comment about the second Trump administration and all the rest. He's playing out his cards, forgetting national interest. He's looking out for. But why is McConnell doing this? And I ask that because he's already gotten cover. Former President Bush already acknowledged and congratulated Biden. You've got multiple Republican senators, Mitt Romney, and others congratulating Biden. Why is McConnell going out on point when he knows in the next iteration of Congress he's going to have to broker deals with Biden, and both of them are going to have to do things they don't necessarily like, but they're going to have to work with each other? Why is McConnell doing this when he's there for 6 more years? Trump's going to be a footnote pretty soon.
Well, I think that's the key there, Richard, is you mentioned brokering deals. I don't think Mitch McConnell has any intention of brokering deals. He's clearly setting himself up the way he did at the beginning of the Obama administration, making it his top goal to defeat Biden, even if that's going to be a lack of progress on the economy, on the virus, on things everybody cares about. So he's acknowledging that Trump's base is basically his base. He thinks that Republicans cannot even tiptoe away from Trump at this moment without antagonizing that base. It's a purely political calculation that seems to be an open defiance of national security and the public interest in dealing with the economy and dealing with the virus.
You saw what Joe Biden chose to do. He chose to say, it's embarrassing, but at the end of the day, this is of no great consequence if Trump won't basically follow protocol of all predecessors in the Oval. Is that the only card he has to play here? Should he be a little bit more hair on fire about, jeopardizing national security? Were you surprised, or was it to be expected that Biden said, don't worry about it here, we'll just play this out till January?
No, I think that's been Biden's message all along, is he's the one bringing calm and stability. So hair or hair plugs on fire, whatever it is not going to work for the image Biden has projected and the way he wants to be president. The Biden people feel quite reasonably that this will play itself out. The problem being the cost of the delays. It's I think there's no point in them firing back in kind. The cases that the Trump administration plans to bring obviously don't have merit, and the whole thing won't go anywhere. So I think he shouldn't get too agitated, and perhaps the best thing is to say, isn't this a sad thing that the Republicans are doing, but they're not going to bring down the Republic.
Just how far into crazy town do you think we go? We saw Secretary Esper be shown the door yesterday. People say it's when, not if. The same will happen to the FBI and CIA director, Barr, who we thought by choosing to sit out the last few weeks and not playing into the demands of Trump had maybe a crisis of conscience. Maybe not after what we saw him do now. Just how far off the rails do you see this going?
Predictions are perilous at all times in the age of Trump, and particularly now. If the president feels he's got his back to the wall facing defeat, and not just defeat, but potentially vulnerability to all kinds of personal liability involving his finances and legal trouble. So he has every incentive to fight, and it seems that he's intimidated everybody from or persuaded everybody from the Attorney General to the Secretary of State to the head of the GSA to go along with it.
I'm going to give a name that you wrote about, but I don't know a lot of people have heard it before. Emily Murphy. She's the head of the GSA, and it's her job basically to, basically say, yes, we're now going to have a transition and turn over, I guess, nearly $100 million to help that process begin, and more importantly, have a more seamless process. You write, by all accounts, she's basically an institutionalist, and she knows the importance, but she's scared you-know-what of crossing Trump and certifying that Biden's the next president. Have you been surprised, and it's easy for me to say this in an air-conditioned studio, but there hasn't been more profiles and courage where people are saying, listen, this ain't worth it to keep my job. This stands against everything I believe in, which, if I read between the lines, that's how she feels about this.
It's tricky, Richard, because yes, she'd likely be fired, but she'd also likely be attacked in a very personal way. And as we've seen with the people, whether it's Fauci, whether it's Leslie Stahl, whether it's Governor Whitmer in Michigan, people that Trump attacks basically then have threats made against their life. I don't know if the GSA administrator, if fired, would be given some sort of police protection. So I understand the hesitation by all these people who just don't want to be at the receiving end of these fairly vicious attacks by the president. On the other hand, she's got to be sitting there and thinking, okay, well, if another 9/11 happens, I'm going to, have been a cause of this.
It's so frankly embarrassing. Dana, I appreciate the conversation as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
All right, folks, when we come back, well, the Trump campaign continues to file lawsuits over the election, and now you got the Attorney General. Just get your arms around that. The U.S. Attorney General, Bill Barr, he's getting involved again, putting his fingers on the scale for the other guy on your screen. After the break, an elections attorney will join us to discuss where this goes from here.